blame my obsession with 50s clothes on watching too many old films when I was little. I usually try to either make my own clothes or buy vintage, but I've had a massive clear out recently, find myself with almost nothing to wear, and thought I'd experiment with shopping on Asos with 1950s taste. And while I couldn't find any flared dresses of the Debbie Reynolds variety, I did find quite a lot of slim, narrow dresses, which was the other main line of the 50s, and all of these are very reminiscent of the 50s wiggle dress. They were very tight and narrow, but that was always offset by the length, pretty much always below the knee. And it does seem to me that the modern bodycon dress trend could be considered a reincarnation of the 1950s wiggle dress. Very form-fitting dresses that retain the longer hemline of the fuller skirt. And these dresses are very true to that style, slim fitting all the way through to the knee, so they're still characteristically 50s, rather than reminding me of the very severe straight skirts of the late 40s. And to my surprise, these dresses really do have a lot of other design elements that were very common in the 50s. You can really see the ruching does create this drapery effect that they really did like. The silhouette of it is very, very 50s going towards the early 60s. So this is how they advertised it on the website, with this little cape situation hanging down like that. But you know, I mean, this is okay, I suppose. It's quite 50s gala, but you know, could benefit probably even from some gloves and a bag, you know, just to make it a little bit more done looking. But also, I do think it's just as nice with the straps up. A bit more, oh no, it's a bit more demure until the straps fall down. So this is an Asos design dress, really quite cute almost in summary. Of course, how could I have got away with talking about the 50s without mentioning polka dots at least once? It seems to be the overarching stereotype. And of course the shoulder line is accurately very small and narrow. The major problem I have with this is the bizarre two-tone effect by having the slip so short, like quite an uncomfortable mini length, and then having the actual dress itself be so long. It's really quite bizarre, and this bit's just terribly see-through. The other complaint is that the ruching at the side does widen the dress considerably at the waist. It's rather unfortunate. That's another, it's kind of like, just to illustrate, like you can't really sit down in it without wanting to keep pulling it down. And I'm afraid, as much as I like the neckline, the annoyance of the slip really does ruin it for me. Now this much more evening-y dress from Club L is my attempt to find a nice portrait neckline on a modern dress. So the historically accurate opinion of this would be it's far too tight. I'm sort of inclined to agree. It's it's quite hard to justify this. So this is another dress I was expecting to absolutely detest, but surprisingly don't. It's a very accurately vintage neckline. The ruched sleeve reminds me almost of a 40s sleeve, but of course, you know, the execution would have been nicer on an actual 40s garment, like it wouldn't have this funny top stitching here around the cuff. It would have been a properly nice draped sleeve with little buttons for the wrist control. But, you know, this is not a bad alternative. I was really not sure about the colour, when I ordered it, because it looked almost like the sort of grey that makes me look dead. In person it does read as a sort of champagne-y pink, but you know, there is always the chance of it looking a little bit too flesh-toned. I think it's got incredibly annoying shoulders. You almost do want to keep pulling them up. They've sort of done their best to counteract that with this little bit of almost gathering here to try and conform it a bit to your arm. But I would say it's not entirely successful. I've sort of been possessed by the need to have one of these little Judith Lever type bags with it. Just thinking, you know, you really want it to look like you were something out of the 1980s. Especially since I've added the bag, the dress really does begin to remind me of Joan Collins in Dynasty. Which is rather fitting because Joan Collins herself is a 50s-80s fusion. The last dress is Asos's own brand, and it's remarkably similar to a vintage dress from the 50s that I own. So in terms of accuracy, I really can't fault it. Very similar in colour, length and cut, and they're both lace. Though admittedly the lace on my 50s dress is nicer. The only thing is, I will say the waist on me should have been slightly lower, because I do have rather... Actually, to be honest, I think I'm even slightly short-waisted. So this is actually a very, very high waist, which again, like, I do find that the waist is being cut higher and higher, which does please me because I do think it's a lot more flattering than having a waist that's drop. I am very impressed with how well they've cut the bodice. You know, it actually has some sort of shape to it. And I really think it's because it's not just stretch fabric. Definitely is, again, a very accurate neckline that you really would have seen. I do fully accept that these cutouts might have not pleased everybody in the 50s, but you know, people do remember the 50s as being a lot more twee than it really was. Perhaps you could have got away with it. I think this one looks vintage enough even without vintage styling, but you really could do well with hat and gloves and a nice vintage bag, because it goes very well with the 50s spring summer kind of garden party thing. I do sort of have a thing about wearing white and having my hair up. Sort of prefer it. But lots of dresses that are very sort of bare around here, I do think it could be nice to have your hair up. But I do need to actually figure out how to pin my hair up properly, because since I've grown it back out, I'm just completely clueless. So that concludes somewhat of a mixed bag in terms of accuracy, but overall not anywhere near as dreadful as I was expecting.